Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Cheat on Me? I have a plan in place. I caught my fiancée cheating on me with some other guy whom she met at the gym. I had built the house we lived in from the ground up, and was smart enough to have bought and installed a surveillance system that not only covered the entire yard, but the inside of the house as well. The system included HD video, audio recording, and even came with night vision. I did not tell her about the system, and she never suspected that she was being watched inside the house. I caught her calling the guy and giving him our address and inviting him over to duck, in her own words. Everything was caught on camera, with audio to boot, and I made sure to make extra copies and save them as evidence. The next day, she went to work as if nothing happened. I left for work as I normally do, but once I was away from the house, I called my boss and told him I was taking a few days off. I've been with this company for over 12 years and was good friends with the owner, so he had no problem with me taking time off. I waited till she came back to the house to begin my plan. The first thing I did was to call all her credit cards and cancel them. Since I paid for everything and they were in my name, I had no problem getting those cancelled. The next thing I did was to take the money from our joint checking account out to put it into my own personal checking account. I then collected all of her clothes, jewelry, shoes, etc., and stuffed them into garbage bags and tossed them into my truck. I had a couple of buddies meet me that morning at the house to help me out. I also changed the codes to get into the house, locking her out. We finished loading everything into my truck and one of my buddies' trucks and left the house. The first stop was at her job, where I used the extra key to her car to get in and drive it away back to my house, while my buddy followed in my truck. The car was in my name and I was not going to let her have it. We then drove to her mum's house, which was about an hour away, and left all her stuff on her mum's porch. I explained to her mum and her sister what she did and told her that it was over and I didn't want her in my house anymore. It took about 20 minutes after leaving her mum's house before I got the first phone call from my now ex. I ignored her phone calls until about call number 10. By this point, she was screaming at the top of her lungs about her stuff being dumped at her mum's house. She demanded an explanation and started threatening to call the police. I laughed and sent her a clip of her sex video that was caught on the home surveillance camera. Just to be petty, I also sent the video to her mother and her two sisters as well. The crap really hit the fan when she got off work and discovered that her car was no longer there. She had to have her mum pay for a lift to carry her back home since none of her credit cards worked and her debit card was useless. I continued to receive regular phone calls for the next 3 to 4 days, which I ignored. I kept her car in the garage where it sits to this day. I've driven it a grand total of twice and I am thinking of selling it once it's paid off. She never bothered coming back to the house, and I heard that she had a lot of blowback from her family regarding her extracurricular activities. She was forced to get a full-time job to make ends meet since she was only working part-time when she was living with me. I have since moved on and dated a couple of times, but I'm holding off getting into something serious until I can find somebody I can truly trust. The next one is titled, She Showed Me Who Was Dominant After She Caught Me Cheating. Sounds completely cruel, but maybe, just maybe, it will encourage him never to cheat again. My wife discovered that I was cheating on her and slowly plotted her revenge. I know this story is hard to believe, but it is true. One night after I fell asleep, she handcuffed my hands behind my back and covered my head with a piece of BDSM equipment known as a bondage hood. She then added a gag and a blindfold. As I cleared the cobwebs out of my head and tried to figure out what was going on, my wife casually and calmly informed me that she knew of my infidelity. She informed me that I had a choice to make. I could continue to remain married to her, but instead a traditional marriage, it would now be a female-led femdom relationship. I was not familiar with this type of arrangement, but I soon found out the hell that it would entail. I chose to remain married partially because a divorce would have been long, contested, humiliating and bitter, and most of our assets are in my wife's name. I also believed that my wife's anger and emotions would eventually blow over and things would return to normal. I could not have been more mistaken. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. The first thing my wife did while I still bound and gagged was locked me into chastity. I was informed that I would never have relations ever again, and that my junk now belongs to her. She also removed all of my body hair, including shaving my head bald. My wife discarded all of my male clothing and feminized me. This was not a case of my ever wanting to cross-dress, even though I do appreciate a well-dressed woman in high heels and a skirt. This was a case of this is your new wardrobe, and too bad if you do not like it. My wife purchased clothing from specialty BDSM stores that could be locked on. The worst part of this was the shoes. My wife started me off with 5-inch stiletto high heels and padlocked them onto my feet. I think that she started with heels that high was because I was always encouraging her to wear super high heels, and never really cared when she would complain about them. Since I work from home, and my business is online, the clothing that I am wearing is of no concern. I do not have to leave the house to make money. I was ashamed and humiliated to be forced to wear female clothing, but the worst was yet to come. I had never worn high heels before but did not think that wearing them would be a cinch. My wife, along with many other women, make walking in high heels look easy. I found out within minutes how wrong I was, and I begged my wife to reconsider this madness and remove them. Unfortunately, the only thing my complaining got me was an introduction as to how far my wife was willing to go. You may wonder why I did not resist, but consider my situation. I was locked in chastity, I had no male clothing, and I was locked in high heels. I was also shackled at the wrists and ankles. I had agreed to submit to my wife, and she was clear that if I wanted to leave that I could at any time. She would take me anywhere I wanted to go and would start the divorce immediately. My wife also informed me that she would not unlock my clothing, high heels or chastity device. That would be my problem. After my wife decided that she did not want to hear my complaints, I was quickly gagged and then punitively punished. My wife beat me until I had tears in my eyes. I screamed through my gag but was ignored. My wife wanted me to understand exactly who was now in charge, and how any sort of disobedience would be dealt with. The next few weeks were pure hell. My wife booked 3 weeks off of work to train me with respect to my deportment. I was given all of the household chores to do. Every single one. Cooking, cleaning, shopping, dusting, laundry, you name it. I also have to tend to all of my wife's needs. If she wants a foot massage or a bath drawn, it falls on me. Most of these tasks or chores I had never done before. My wife did them after coming home from work. All of these tasks were, and are, performed in ridiculously high heels and, usually, bondage. Every single mistake, complaint, or act of disobedience was, and still is, met with progressively harsher punishments. It took months for my feet, legs and calf muscles to stop hurting because of the high heels. For weeks I minced around in these tortuous shoes as I could not balance myself properly. It took even longer to realize that my wife is in full control and that this new relationship was unlikely to change anytime soon. It has been this way since March of 2016. As I mentioned earlier, I can leave at any time, but that would mean starting over with only the clothes on my back and the shoes locked on my feet. I have learned the hard way that revenge is a dish best served cold. My wife has seen to it and enjoys the humiliation and shame that I have. By catching me cheating, it somehow woke her dominant side, and she revels in the power and control that she has over me. She has been true to her word and I have not been able to have any relations since I was placed into chastity. Naturally, she is very pleased with our new arrangement, and has ensured that it will never happen again. The next one is titled, "Don't Want Them to Build Another Story Onto Their House? They'll build 2 more instead. Don't like the idea of 2 stories? No worries, 3 stories it is." So, to establish some things, the parents of my father own a couple of apartment complexes in this big city, Germany. They as well as me and my parents all live in this one house, but in different apartments. My father grew up in this house and never moved away. I will probably one day move to another floor. I'm 19 but don't intend to leave this house. My grandpa just told me that in the early 80s, it used to be just 1 story high, so really just a very long but super short house, if that makes any sense. I'm living on the 3rd floor at the moment, so I asked how this came to pass. What he told me was absolutely hilarious. Okay, now the story. My grandparents wanted to add another story to this very long and flat house. So they obviously contacted the authorities and got all the paperwork done. Everything was fine. Then their neighbor found out about this and got really mad. He owned and still owns some other apartment complexes in this same area and on the same street. He inherited those complexes from his father. My grandparents reminded the neighbor that they had a deal with the neighbor's father, that if my grandparents wanted to add more floors to their houses, then the neighbor would comply as long as he also could add more floors. All the neighbor had to say to this was, "Yeah, that's what my father said to you, but now he's dead and I don't want you to add another floor to your house. I'll sue you if you do that." To which my grandpa just replied in his sweetest voice, "All right, do it." The reason why the neighbor could sue us for adding another floor was some weird clause in the German law that existed at that time that stated a house only could be so high so that the houses next to it would get a specific amount of sun and air. The idea was to not cast a huge shadow on the other houses around. My grandpa knew this was bullshit because a few houses in this area already had like 7 floors, so it wouldn't be an inconvenience if our house would stock up. So he went to court. He told me that there literally was a court meeting and a trial on the street in front of our house. He brought a lawyer, his attorney, police officers, and some specialists from the State Department with him. There the specialists said that our house could actually be 3 floors tall without robbing this neighbor any of his air and sun. With the attorney and the lawyer as witnesses, everything was settled. Then the neighbor came over and had a fit, screaming and huffing the whole time and demanded that it should only be 1 floor at most. My grandpa said, "All right, we'll do 1 floor, and then we're gonna see what we'll do next." They built the floor. And then, because that's what the specialists said, built another. Right as when the workers wanted to start to work on the second added, so in total 3rd floor, the neighbor comes flying. Demands to know why they're doing 1 more than they said they'll do. Police were called. The police, already very tired of this whole situation and especially with the neighbor, told my grandpa to continue building because the concrete was already mixed and ready to use. This house is now 3 floors high. I don't really know what happened to the neighbor because I never met him, but my grandpa said that they're fine now. There was some kind of story that ended up with my grandpa actually building walls around some of the windows of the 3rd floor because the neighbor demanded some bullshit about fireproof windows. Definitely fireproof if you ask me. The next one is titled, "Block My Chance at a Promotion and Salary Increase." You never know what happens next. For background, I work in a very competitive part of the service industry. It's a large enough community, but at the same time it's small enough where someone somewhere in the industry knows you, so it's important to not burn bridges as one day you might find yourself in a disadvantageous position. I was in my position for a good 3 years as middle management, no call-outs, never late, always stayed after to help my team out, worked on projects that belonged to my bosses, etc. Except for one day which I had gotten in a car accident. I was working the night shift and it was raining, this is important later in the story, and was unable to go into work as my car was undrivable and I had to wait for tow truck, insurance, and trying to find a ride late night, early morning was very difficult. At the time, my director had been let go and there was a bloodbath, pissing contest to see who would get his promotion. For hierarchy purposes, it's my director, my direct bosses all on the same level of authority, 3 of them, than me. One of the direct bosses, let's call him Dick, decided he was getting the promotion and started shaking our department. Restructuring projects, changing people's shifts, taking credit for other people's work, he was a real pain. About a few weeks of this, he had decided to switch me from morning shifts, which I had gotten due to my seniority in the team, into night shifts. I didn't make a stink because we were very short-handed, also important, and the team needed help as we had newer members who had children, and I understood how this could affect their life. Fast forward a few more weeks and I get into the car accident which made me call out. This didn't sit well with him as I had made the team suffer because of my irresponsibility. Lol, what? I didn't think much of it since I knew it was stressful and people tend to say things they don't mean under stress. Soon after that, I met some higher-ups from another department. They offered me a job in a new venture the business was exploring. I was a good candidate because of my experience and work traits. Of course, I agreed as this would be a promotion in position and salary, plus my network of contacts would put me in a position to grow even further. I went through a series of interviews, 3 in total, and I was given the opportunity to take the position. I signed my paperwork and shook the hand. A couple of days later HR called me saying the position was rescinded, and that it shouldn't come as a surprise. I was shocked and asked for a meeting to understand the decision. Cue the day of the meeting. I walked in and HR is sitting in the meeting room with Dick. After the cordialities, Dick explains that he blocked my promotion because I had attendance issues, which I had one call out due to my accident, and HR chimed in saying this shouldn't deter me from applying again in 6 months. I accepted defeat because I still needed my job, and I didn't want to paint a target on my back. A couple of days later, a friend of mine that worked close to Dick had told me Dick had made the comment that he didn't want to let me go because I would leave the night shift uncovered, and no one would easily accept that shift. I was furious but decided to not act on it. As I explained earlier, it's a small enough business. A few months later, the competition opened up close enough that a few people left to go there. I was one of them. I was hired by an amazing boss who I am still friends with years after. He offered me a great position and a huge raise in salary. For hierarchy purposes, it was my boss, then me, and my counterpart, then our assistants. I had heard through the grapevine that Dick had gotten rejected from the director position and was leaving the company. About a week or so later, I was looking at new hires with my boss to fill out my counterpart position. My boss calls me and says, "Hey, look, this guy comes from the company you came from." To my delight, I saw Dick's name. I had been hiring people to the assistant positions from the previous company, so I guess Dick thought he was next. I told my boss the story about Dick and how he blocked my promotion. All my boss said was TBNT, thank you but no thank you. We didn't even give him an interview. Like I said before, don't burn bridges if your industry is small. The next one is titled, Horrible Landlord Now Gets to Enjoy the Stench of Decaying Rats. I had a dreadful landlord with whom I had to live. I was essentially one of 3 lodgers. I lived in his home for about 3 months, watching other tenants come and go. The roommate turnover was very high, and for good reason. This man combined the worst qualities of a hoarder with an OCD neat freak, had no sense of boundaries or scale, neglected basic landlord responsibilities such as ensuring heat and power, and spoke with a murderer's whisper and a stare. And yet, I never showed the slightest hint of displeasure. I smiled through everything and was always courteous and friendly in the face of his awfulness. I knew, you see, that someday I might have to correct him, and it would be better if he had no anticipation of any impending retribution. I had a spare keycut for his house and kept it in my pocket at all times. When he refused to return my deposit until a month after I had left the premises, I began my plan. I waited. And waited. And waited. 3 months after I had left, with my cash firmly in hand, I went to a local pet store and bought several frozen rats. They are intended as snake food, I believe. I cased his house until he and all his current tenants had left. Then I entered, fed his dog some treats, and dropped the frozen rats, one by one, inside his beloved piano. The rats, you see, began to thaw very slowly. Then they began to rot. Have you ever smelled the rotting carcass of a dead rat? It's vile. Putrescent. It permeates everything. There is a reason for the phrase, "I smell a rat." I knew it would take some time before he could find the source of the smell. I knew further that the bloated, oozing corpses would utterly ruin his piano. But above all, I knew that he would have absolutely no way of connecting the incident with any kind of human intervention. It would look, for all the world, like a nest of rats had made their home and perished in his piano. He could not convincingly lay blame on me or anyone else present in his house. Revenge isn't about teaching people a lesson, you see. It's not important that they know what they did wrong. It is merely enough to mete out the appropriate level of cosmic punishment for your own sense of satisfaction. The next one is titled, Okay, Mum, If You Really Need the Front Seat. We are currently living with my parents and it sucks. This story makes me feel a lot better. My mum is pretty nasty to my wife. I stand up for the missus every time, but it is still something we are working on, or will be in the future. Right now my mum is on a my house, my rules power trip. This happened when we had our own place. We've never been super well off, and our car was a piece of crap and the passenger side front window could not be rolled up. We picked my mum up at the airport. My lovely was in the front, and instead of hello, the first thing out of my mum's mouth was that she was sitting in the front. I nicely asked her to get in the back, but she fought with me about how my wife is disrespectful. My mum went to put her bag in the trunk, and I asked my wife to sit in the back. She gave me a look of betrayal, but I promised her it would be worth it. I mentioned to my mum that the window doesn't roll up, but she didn't care. It was a nice sunny day, the perfect day actually for a car wash. My mum seemed to have forgotten about her window until the water hit her in the face. She started swearing at me, but I just blew my wife a kiss. The best part was the cloth thing with the big soapy mess, and yes, the car got soaked, but it was 100% worth it. My mum was wet and furious, so of course we stopped at the drive-thru, got some ice cream, and took the long way home. Amazingly, my mum was happy to sit in the back when we brought her back to the airport. The last one is titled, Elsa Must Be So Proud. When living in New York, my husband left for deployment right as winter started. I'm from Arizona, so the snow was a new thing for me. Our neighbors were this horrible couple who thought the world owed them. The husband was an officer and they were both young. This is the norm in a military town. One evening, I come home from work to see about 3 inches of snow covering our parking lot and a handful of my neighbors are out shoveling. I get out and join them. They did a lot more work than I did, but I did get my 2 reserved spots cleared. I moved my car in and went inside. The next morning, when I leave for work, I notice the neighbors are parked off to the side as they couldn't get into their spot without shoveling. When I get home from work, I go to pull into my spot, but it's covered in snow, like 6 inches of snow. It hadn't snowed that day. Then I see the neighbor jerks are parked in their perfect and clean spot. That's when I realized they just shoveled the snow from their spot into mine instead of piling it to the side like normal people. So I pulled off to the side and waited. They left at 2 a.m. for a party. I went out and reshoveled the snow from my spot into theirs, and then our other neighbor's snow into their spot as well, packed it down a little too. My other neighbor comes home around this time, sees what I've done and laughs and gives me a high five. He said they do this every time it snows. I went inside, warmed up and went to bed. I was awoken at about 5 a.m. to ticked off screaming outside. I fell back asleep and woke up at 9 to even angrier screams because apparently, we had some heat wave between 2 and 9 that started to melt the snow and then another freeze that refroze it. So now they were dealing with ice. They never messed with my spot again. Thanks for listening.